He gave up his seat to a pregnant woman on a crowded subway, just a simple act of kindness. But minutes later, she collapsed and pointed straight at him, gasping, "He did something to me." What followed was a chilling descent into public suspicion, injustice, and a truth that no one saw coming. The rush hour train was already packed when Marcus Allen stepped onto the platform at Hoyt-Schermerhorn in Brooklyn. The stale air of the underground station clung to his clothes, mixing with the faint tang of grease and sweat from the HVAC repair job he'd just wrapped up. 34 years old, built solid like a linebacker but quiet in demeanor, Marcus moved with the kind of patience that comes from working long hours in tight crawlspaces and overheated attics. He adjusted the strap of his tool backpack and kept his eyes focused as the train doors hissed open. A blur of people shuffled off and on. Marcus slipped inside and grabbed the nearest overhead bar. The car was packed shoulder to shoulder, the kind of crowd that left barely enough space to shift your weight. But he didn't mind. He wasn't in a rush, and all he could think about was getting to his sister Cynthia's apartment in Queens for his niece's 10th birthday party. It had been a rough week, and some cake and family laughter sounded like exactly what he needed. As the train rumbled forward, Marcus noticed a woman standing just a few feet away. She was visibly pregnant, maybe in her late 20s, wearing a floral maternity dress and holding onto a pole with one hand while the other clutched a large tote bag. Sweat beaded along her brow, and she swayed slightly with the train's jerky momentum. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Ma'am," he said gently, tapping her arm, "you need this more than I do." She looked startled at first, then smiled, eyes a little glassy. "Thank you," she whispered, carefully easing herself into the seat he'd just vacated. Marcus offered a nod and returned to his spot near the door, planting his feet for balance as the train lurched into the next tunnel. He checked his watch. Still enough time to make it to the party before candles. He let out a quiet breath. Small acts, his mama used to say, matter most when no one expects them. But just 2 stops later, that small act would spiral into something he never saw coming. Without warning, the woman slumped forward. Her purse slipped off her lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. Her body followed, collapsing to her knees, one hand pressed against her stomach, the other clawing for air. "Ma'am," someone called out. "She's not okay," another voice shouted. A ripple of panic moved through the train car like a sudden jolt of electricity. Marcus, without thinking, bent down toward her. Hey, can you hear me? Are you all right?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, her lips trembling. And then she pointed, right at him. It was him, she gasped, her voice barely audible but laced with panic. "He did something." Time stopped. The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. The accusation cut through the packed car like a knife. A murmur rose instantly. Heads turned. A man in a suit leaned forward, eyebrows furrowed. "What did she say?" Another woman, clutching a stroller, stepped back and glanced sideways at Marcus. "Did she say he hurt her?" Marcus's mouth parted, but no words came out. He blinked, unsure if he'd misheard. "Wait, what?" he managed. No, I just gave her my seat." But the current of suspicion had already shifted. Assumptions spread like wildfire. Someone reached for the emergency intercom. A voice in the back shouted, "Get an officer." "Pull the brake." "I saw him by her," a man muttered. "I don't know what he was doing." He was standing right next to her bag. "He touched her." "No, wait, I'm not sure," Marcus's heart pounded. His breath quickened. "I didn't touch her," he said firmly. "I was by the door. I just gave her my seat, that's it." But no one seemed to hear him. Or maybe they didn't want to. His words were swallowed by rising voices, confusion, fear. A teenage girl with braids sitting across the aisle clutched her phone tightly, her eyes darting between Marcus and the woman on the floor. Then the train screeched to a halt. The doors hissed open, and within seconds, 2 transit officers stepped on board. One held a hand to his hip, near his holster. "What's going on here?" he demanded. A dozen people began talking at once. She collapsed. She pointed at him. He was standing right over her. She said he did something. She's pregnant, for God's sake. The officer's eyes locked onto Marcus. You, he said, firm. Step off the train. What? No. I didn't do anything. Marcus said, hands raised slightly. Ask around. I gave her my seat. That's it. Let's figure this out off the train, the second officer cut in. Now. I have a video, the teenage girl suddenly called out. Her voice cracked the chaos like a crack of lightning. Everyone went still. I saw the whole thing, she said, standing up and holding out her phone. He didn't touch her. He didn't even go near her bag. He just gave her his seat. One officer took the phone, his face unreadable as he watched the footage. The other crouched beside the woman. Ma'am, can you tell us what happened? She was sitting up now, supported by another passenger, her face pale, her hand still on her belly. I don't know, she stammered. I just felt dizzy. But he was right there. I thought, she trailed off. You thought, Marcus said, his voice lower now. You assumed. A long silence followed. The officer with the phone looked at his partner. She never touched him. He didn't do anything wrong. The partner nodded slowly. Her blood pressure's dropping, one of the paramedics said, stepping aboard. That might explain the fainting and confusion. We need to get her to the hospital. The tension didn't leave. Not fully. People still looked at Marcus sideways. Their stares didn't say sorry. They said maybe. Maybe you still did something. Maybe we just didn't see it. As Marcus stepped off the train under the officer's direction, he felt every pair of eyes on him. Not one of them belonged to someone who had spoken up for him, except that girl. He walked in silence, fists clenched at his sides. Behind him, the train doors closed. The crowd stayed behind. But so did the sting of judgment and the echo of a single sentence, it was him. The train doors closed behind Marcus with a mechanical hiss, sealing away the swarm of eyes that had just condemned him with their silence, their stares, and their whispered assumptions. As he stepped onto the platform under the harsh fluorescent lights of the station, his boots hitting the concrete with heavy thuds, a fresh wave of adrenaline washed over him, followed by something colder, heavier, disbelief. He had offered his seat. That was it. A small, human gesture. And now he stood here, surrounded by 2 transit officers and a growing circle of onlookers, as if he were some kind of threat. The woman, still clutching her stomach, still wide-eyed, had been helped to a bench by paramedics, their voices low as they checked her vitals. Marcus stood off to the side, arms crossed over his chest, trying to breathe evenly, trying not to let the rising heat in his body spill over into something they could twist into aggression. One of the officers, a younger white man with a clipped tone and an air of manufactured authority, flipped open a small notepad. Let's go over it again. You gave up your seat, and then what? And then she passed out, Marcus replied evenly. I didn't touch her. I was standing by the door the whole time. Ask anyone who was watching. The officer barely looked up. Well, we have conflicting statements. A few passengers said you were close to her bag. Because I was near the door, Marcus shot back, then quickly checked himself, lowering his voice. I wasn't hovering over her. I wasn't near her belongings. I just stood up and minded my business. Sir, the other officer, a taller one, Hispanic, older, cut in, we're just trying to get the full picture. It'll help if you stay calm. Marcus looked at him, his expression unreadable. I am calm. But this is ridiculous. From a few feet away, a voice chimed in. I saw him. He was right next to her. Real close. A woman in her mid-50s, wearing a power blazer and pearls, arms crossed and eyebrows raised like she was testifying in court. I don't know what he did, but something seemed off. Off? Marcus turned toward her. You didn't even look at me until she fell. I'm just saying what I saw, the woman said, lifting her chin as if daring him to argue. Marcus clenched his jaw, every muscle in his face working overtime to suppress the frustration boiling underneath. Another murmur swept through the spectators, and once again, the Whisper Network began its work, filling in blanks, building narratives, twisting perception into suspicion. But then, from the back of the group, a girl's voice broke through. "That's not true," she said. Clear. Calm. Undeniably certain. It was the teenage girl from the train, the one who had been filming. She stepped forward, phone in hand, her braids swinging behind her shoulders. "I recorded it. I saw the whole thing." The crowd quieted as she handed her phone to the older officer. He watched for a long moment, then turned the screen toward his partner. Both men studied it carefully, frame by frame. "It shows him offering the seat," the older officer muttered. Then moving to the door. "He's not even near her when she falls." The younger one sighed through his nose and looked up at Marcus. "All right. This does support your version." Marcus folded his arms tighter. "Of course it does." Just then, one of the paramedics called out, her blood pressures crashing, "We need to transport her now." The pregnant woman, pale and disoriented, was lifted gently onto a stretcher. She murmured something inaudible. The paramedic leaned in. "Ma'am, do you remember what happened?" She looked around hazily, her gaze settling on Marcus for a fleeting moment. I don't know. I got dizzy. I thought," she trailed off again. "Maybe I was wrong." Her voice was barely audible, and no one around seemed to notice, except Marcus. "Maybe," he echoed under his breath. But the damage was done. The officers exchanged a quick glance. "Sir, you're not being detained," the older one said. "We appreciate your cooperation. Just one of those unfortunate misunderstandings." "A misunderstanding," Marcus repeated, his voice flat, as he looked around at the same people who had stared him down just minutes earlier. "Yeah. Real unfortunate." No one apologized. No one thanked him. No one turned to say, "We were wrong." They just looked away, like shame could be erased with a quick glance at the floor. The crowd began to disperse. A few still cast suspicious looks, as if they couldn't quite let go of the version of events they had built in their heads. Marcus stood still, his breath steady, but his chest felt like it was being pressed between cinder blocks. The teenage girl, Tiana, as he would learn later, stepped up beside him. "I'm sorry they did that to you," she said, voice quiet. "You didn't deserve that." Marcus turned to her and nodded slowly. "Thanks for speaking up." "If you hadn't," he stopped, the words catching. She shrugged. "It's just not fair. People see what they want." He didn't reply, but the look in his eyes said everything. The officers turned to leave, the situation officially resolved in their eyes. But for Marcus, there was no resolution. There was only residue, the kind that stuck to your skin, that soaked into your memory and stayed there long after the incident was over. As he made his way toward the nearest exit, his phone buzzed. A text from his sister, "You almost here? We're about to light the candles." He stared at the message for a long moment. His thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't reply. Not yet. Not until he could breathe again. On the escalator, he heard two people whispering behind him. I mean, he looked the part, didn't he? Yeah, well, you can never be too careful these days. The words dug into him like splinters. He wanted to turn, to ask what part do I look like, but he didn't. He just kept riding upward, the station fading behind him like a bad memory that refused to stay. Buried. Once he reached the street, the evening air hit him, cool and sharp, like truth after a lie. He took a long breath, letting it settle into his lungs. But it didn't soothe the sting. As he walked down the block toward the transfer station, the image of the woman's finger pointing at him, asterisk it was him, asterisk played over and over in his mind. That image would stay with him. Just like the way everyone had believed it. Just like the way no one said a word when they realized it wasn't true. And he knew, deep in his bones, that next time, there might not be a Tiana. Next time, there might not be a video. He thought of all the others who hadn't been so lucky. All the men whose truth had drowned under assumptions. And the worst part? He had done the right thing. And it still wasn't enough. The sun had dipped behind the skyline by the time Marcus stepped off the bus in Queens, the fading light casting long shadows across the sidewalk as if even the day itself felt heavy with what had transpired. His shoulders still carried the weight of the platform, the stairs, the voices, some accusing, others indifferent, and that single sentence that had unraveled his evening: it was him. The words still echoed in his mind like a drumbeat, each step toward his sister Cynthia's apartment growing heavier. He could already hear the laughter from inside, the high-pitched shrieks of children, and the familiar rhythm of his niece's favorite birthday playlist playing in the background. But Marcus wasn't ready to walk in with a smile. Not yet. Not with his chest still knotted from what had happened on that train. He paused at the base of the front stoop, drawing in a breath, rolling his shoulders like he could physically shake off the sting of suspicion, the sting of being reduced to a threat in the blink of an eye, just for being kind, and just for being him. He finally knocked. Cynthia opened the door with her usual warmth, her curls tied up in a messy bun, still wearing an apron dusted in flour. "There he is. Took you long enough, Uncle Marcus," she teased, before stepping aside and hugging him tightly. He hugged her back but said little, managing a strained smile. "Traffic," he said simply. She looked at him a beat longer than necessary, eyes narrowing just enough to catch the lie. But she didn't press, not yet. Inside, the apartment was filled with balloons, laughter, and the smell of baked ziti. His niece Jasmine darted into the living room, party hat askew, yelling, "Uncle Marcus," before launching herself into his arms. For a few seconds, all the tension melted as he hugged her, listening to her squeal about cake, presents, and how she wanted to be an astronaut chef when she grew up. Marcus laughed, genuinely for the first time that day. But even in the light of family, that shadow still trailed him. As the evening wore on, he stayed quiet. He laughed when appropriate, nodded through conversations, but his eyes were somewhere else. Cynthia noticed. When the last slice of cake had been eaten and the kids were winding down, she found him standing alone on the small balcony outside her kitchen, looking out at the city like it might offer answers. "All right," she said softly, joining him with 2 mugs of tea. "What happened?" Marcus didn't answer at first. The hum of the city below filled the silence between them. Finally, he sighed. "I gave up my seat on the train. To a pregnant woman." Cynthia raised an eyebrow. "And?" He looked at her, jaw tight. "And then she collapsed. Next thing I know, she's pointing at me, saying I did something. And just like that, everyone started staring. Whispering. Like I was some kind of criminal." Her face tightened. "You're kidding." "I wish I was," he said bitterly. "They pulled me off the train. Surrounded me. Accused me. Some woman said I was too close to her bag. Like that meant anything." Cynthia stared at him, silent. "You should have seen their faces. It didn't matter what I said. They'd already made up their minds." "How did it end?" she asked. "A girl. Teenager. She recorded the whole thing. Showed them the video. It cleared me." He shook his head. "Even the subway cameras backed it up later. Turns out the woman just had low blood pressure. Nothing to do with me. But that didn't stop them from looking at me like I was dangerous. Like I didn't belong." Cynthia put a hand on his shoulder, her voice quiet. "You stayed calm. You told the truth. That's strength, not weakness." Marcus looked down into his tea, then up at the stars. "It didn't feel like strength." "Maybe not then," she said. "But it is now. You walked through it. With your head up. That matters." He nodded, slowly, but the tightness in his chest remained. "You know what gets me," he said after a pause. I was raised to be kind, to show respect, to give up my seat. But all it took was a glance and a guess for people to see me as something else. One woman pointed, and it was like the rest of the world filled in the blanks with everything they already feared about someone like me. That's because they don't see you, Cynthia said. They see what they're taught to fear. And they never ask themselves if it's real. Inside, Marcus's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket and looked at the screen. It was a link from an unknown number. A video. He tapped play. It was the footage, Tiana's video. The entire scene from the train, him offering his seat, the woman collapsing, the chaos, the accusations, and then silence. The caption read, "This is why we don't assume." He did nothing wrong. It had already been shared thousands of times. Marcus stared at it, stunned. "Who sent that?" Cynthia asked. "I think, the girl who recorded it. Her name was Tiana. She posted it? Looks like it." He watched the comments scroll. This man was treated like a criminal for being kind. "Thank you, Tiana, for speaking up. We need to be better." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. And then he smiled, just slightly. "She didn't have to do that." "But she did," Cynthia said. "And now people are seeing the truth." "Even if they didn't want to," Marcus muttered. "Especially because they didn't want to." He looked back out at the lights dotting the cityscape. For the first time since stepping off that train, he felt something lift. Not the memory. That would stay. But the weight of being alone in it, that was fading. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking, how many people didn't have a Tiana? How many people went through something like this and didn't have a video to save them?" Cynthia didn't speak. She didn't have to. They both knew the answer. Marcus took a long sip of tea. "I won't let this make me bitter," he said. "I won't stop being kind. Even if it costs me again. Because if I change who I am because of them, they win twice." Cynthia smiled. "You were raised right." "Damn right I was," he said with a small laugh. Inside, the party was winding down. Parents were gathering coats, kids slipping out of socks, music turned low. But outside, on that quiet balcony, Marcus felt like the real party was just beginning, the one where truth stood up, and people started listening. Maybe not all of them. Maybe not forever. But enough to remind him he wasn't alone. And that was enough. Because the truth, once it's out in the open, doesn't go away. It ripples. It reaches. It sticks. As the city buzzed beneath them, Marcus looked up one last time at the sky. And he made himself a quiet promise to keep standing. To keep speaking. And to never, ever, let someone else's fear define his humanity. As the author of Marcus Allen's story, I want to take a moment to reflect on what this journey truly reveals, not just about Marcus, but about the world we all live in. You see, Marcus did something simple. Something decent. He gave up his seat on a crowded subway to help a pregnant woman. That act should have been unremarkable, in the best way. It should have gone unnoticed, or maybe even appreciated quietly. But instead, it unraveled into a storm of suspicion, fueled not by facts, but by fear and bias. And that's the lesson I hope we all take to heart. We live in a world where a single accusation, a single pointed finger, can carry more weight than 1,000 good intentions. Marcus's story isn't just about a misunderstanding, it's about the danger of assumptions. The danger of allowing our fears to override our humanity. And the truth is, there are countless people like Marcus, men and women whose acts of kindness are misinterpreted, whose very presence is questioned, whose dignity is constantly on the line. But there's another side to this story too. There's Tiana, the teenager who saw the truth and had the courage to speak up. Her voice didn't just clear Marcus's name, it changed the narrative. She reminded us that allyship matters. That when you see injustice, even if you're young or unsure, your voice can make a difference. She didn't stay silent, and because of that, the truth had a chance to be heard. To everyone listening to this, I want to say this: never underestimate the power of your presence. Whether you're the one being judged or the one standing on the sidelines, your response matters. Stand up when it's hard. Speak up when it's uncomfortable. And most importantly, don't let fear write someone else's story. To those who've ever been in Marcus's shoes, who've been looked at with suspicion just for existing, I see you. I hear you. And you are not alone. You are more than the assumptions made about you. You are more than the silence of bystanders. You are worthy of respect, truth, and dignity. On behalf of U.S. Justice Story, thank you for spending your time with us today. If this story moved you, if it stirred something inside you, we ask that you share it. Let Marcus's story be a reminder that truth is often quiet, but when spoken with courage, it echoes far and wide. We appreciate you for listening, for feeling, and for being part of a community that believes in justice, compassion, and truth. Stay safe, stay aware, and as always, keep standing for what's right.